Q&A Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @Q&A Review, that is @symbol CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@QNreview.com. That is INFORMATION @symbol CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the Herald Scotland on Wednesday the 7th of February 2024, from the business section. BP cheers investors, but questions linger on climate change. This article is written by Scott Wright. Energy giant BP reported a steep fall in profits for 2023, but you won't find shareholders complaining. The oil and gas giant saw underlying replacement cost profit, its preferred benchmark, tumble by 50% to $13.8 billion, that's £11 billion, as the benefits from the spike in commodity prices that immediately followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 began to wear off. The company's profits of nearly $3 billion for the fourth quarter were better than the market forecast, but that was not the key reason why the company's share price was up by more than 5% today. It was the prospect of hefty returns to shareholders which cheered the market. BP announced a buyback worth $1.75 billion for the fourth quarter and said that would be followed by the repurchase of $3.5 billion of shares in the first half of the year, adding that it expects to complete buybacks worth at least $14 billion over 2024 to 2025. The buybacks appeared to shift the focus away from BP's net zero strategy, which has seen it simultaneously criticised by green campaigners for not going far and fast enough, and investors, on the other hand, who believe it should be doing more to maximise hydrocarbons. BP itself has shown it is in no hurry to walk away from areas such as the North Sea, where it brought the Seagull field off the east of Aberdeen into production in 2023, though Chief Executive Murray Auchincloss told Reuters news agency today that the company was still committed to reducing oil production by 25%, from 2019 levels by 2030. His predecessor, Bernard Looney, has previously targeted reducing oil production by 40% by 2030, before watering down that target amid the upheaval that followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Michael Hewson, Chief Market Analyst at CMC Markets UK, seemed to sum up the situation well, stating, BP appears to be sticking with the current strategy and focusing on pacifying shareholders with throwing extra cash their way with further buybacks. While this is likely to be welcomed in the short term by shareholders, the reluctance to invest more money in longer-term high-margin projects is likely to be a concern if BP wants to maintain these levels of payouts to shareholders. That article was written by Scott Wright. This is from the Herald Scotland on Wednesday the 7th of February 2024, from the Voices section. The Promise made pledges to care experienced people it can't keep. This article is written by Katrina Stewart. The crux of The Promise is perfection, and why not? Scotland prides herself on being a socially progressive and forward-thinking country, and there is nothing more progressive than making sure our care-experienced young people have the same opportunities to thrive as any other young person. It is now 4 years exactly since the publication of Fiona Duncan's independent care review. It involved an unprecedented scope of experience and took 3 years to investigate and draft its final report, The Promise. It came with pledges of specific action. The organisation The Promise Scotland was set up and tasked with implementing the recommendations of the report by 2030. So, where are we now? According to the advocacy charity Who Cares Scotland, not far enough. Who Cares Scotland submitted a sweeping range of freedom of information requests to local authorities and received back a mixed picture of how councils are faring in transforming services for care-experienced communities. One particularly startling data return was from a local authority where 83% of social workers had been off work due to sickness in 2023. That's 20 percentage points higher than 2 years previously. We don't know which local authority this applies to, as Who Cares Scotland chose to anonymise its data. It wanted to be clear that the report into the progress of The Promise was not an exercise in blame, but more of a report card looking at the situation broadly. What this figure speaks to is the inherent difficulty in fulfilling some of the pledges of The Promise. The Care Review, spearheaded by then First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who championed care-experienced young people during her tenure, took significant guidance from people with lived experience. Lived experienced has become one of those buzzwords that causes sighs from cynics, but it's vital to understand how systems impact the people involved in those systems. Lived experience for a child in a children's hearing is going to differ vastly from my experience in a children's hearing as a panel member, for example. When people with lived experience talk about how their experience might be improved, what they envisage is a perfect world. Reality and perfection butt against each other, however, and rarely intersect. And so, one of the stated desires of those who fed into the promise was consistency of care by social work, and consistency of panel members at hearings. It sounds sensible and straightforward. The promise talks a lot about love, about weaving love and a feeling of being cherished into a care system. How you persuade a professional to show love for the child or young person they work with is an entirely different matter, and one on which the promise is silent. Certainly, consistency is a solid starting point for building meaningful relationships, whether that translates into love or not. Yet no employer can mandate for staff sickness, or people leaving for new jobs, or retiring, or whatever else life throws up. Another pledge is that children's hearings take place at a time that suits the children and young people's schedule, that is, not during school hours. School hours are also office hours. So you then have to find volunteers who can sit in the evenings rather than the daytime, which may suit for some people but be impossible for others. Or you professionalise the system and hire people who can work antisocial hours. I've written about this before, but I believe professionalising the children's hearing system would be a devastatingly retrograde step that would fundamentally undermine the ethos of the system. For some looked after and accommodated children, panel members are the only people in their lives who are not paid to be there. Who Cares Scotland's report raises further concerns about the use of restraint and the use of informal school exclusions. The concern is that the pledge to eradicate restraint has been watered down by the use of weasel words, safe hold, rather than restraint, and a shift in position from ceasing restraint entirely to only using it where necessary. informal school exclusions are where reduced timetables are used to support young people who can't cope with a full timetable. Schools say they assist in giving pupils at least some contact time, with a view to building up more time in school. Opponents say they fail care-experienced young people by unofficially excluding them from school life. Having interviewed staff working in children's units, there seems to be no clear way to completely eradicate the use of restraint, where young people's behaviour is a danger to themselves or others, particularly where weapons are involved. There is sometimes very little that can be done when a teenager point-blank refuses to attend school. Even an hour a week is better than nothing, and isn't a sign teaching staff are trying to keep them out of school. It can be a sign that teaching staff are doing everything in their power to include them. It's similar to calls to eradicate rough sleeping. It is a right and correct desire, but not everyone, for complex reasons, wants to come indoors. In a perfect world, all children would be in school full-time and restraint would be unconscionable. We are not in a perfect world. Teaching staff and social workers also have in common the fact that they can't solve everything alone, no matter how committed they are to the promise. There needs also to be significant investment in mental health services to cut waiting lists and ensure children and families have access to supports, particularly at crisis points. Social security needs to be designed in such a way to support families, particularly when children are temporarily moved from parental care, so that poverty does not delay or prevent family reunification. Destigmatising social work involvement. Don't we all need help sometimes? And adequate resources for social work departments are also key. The promise is groundbreaking in that it dreams big. Not all dreams, however, can become reality. That article was written by Katrina Stewart. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 8th of February 2024 from the news section. Brianna J. Sunak urged to apologise after trans jibe. This article is written by Andrew Learmonth. Rishi Sunak has been widely condemned for making a jibe about the Labour leader's position on trans issues while the mother of murdered teen Brianna J was in the House of Commons. Sir Keir Starmer said the Conservative leader position was shameful and accused him of parading as a man of integrity when he's got absolutely no responsibility. Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon also criticised Mr Sunak, but she said that had Esther J not been in Parliament, then no one, including Keir Starmer, would have batted an eyelid. Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe were both 15 when they attacked Brianna, 16, with a hunting knife in 2023. Last week, the teenage pair was sentenced to life in prison for what the judge said was an exceptionally brutal killing, partly motivated by Brianna's transgender identity. Opening Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir praised Miss J, who is campaigning for tougher sanctions on social media. He said, "This week the unwavering bravery of Brianna J's mother, Esther, has touched us all. As a father, I can't even imagine the pain that she is going through, and I am glad that she is with us in the gallery here today." Sir Keir then raised Mr Sunak's £1,000 bet with TV host Piers Morgan about his Rwanda policy. A year ago, the Prime Minister promised to bring NHS waiting lists down. Isn't he glad he didn't bet a grand on it, he asked. Mr Sunak replied, "At least I stand by my commitments. He is so indecisive, the only bet he would make is an each-way bet." Replying, the Labour leader said, "He says he stands by his commitments. He once insisted if he missed his promises, These are the words he used: "I am the Prime Minister," and then said, "It is on me personally." Today we learn from his own officials that he is a blocker to any deal to end the doctor strikes, and every time he is asked, he blames everyone else. So, what exactly did he mean when he said it is on him personally if he doesn't meet his promise? The Prime Minister replied, "We are bringing the waiting lists down for the longest waiters and making progress, but it is a bit rich to hear about promises from someone who has broken every single promise he was elected on. I think I've counted almost 30 in the last year. Pensions, planning, peerages, public sector pay, tuition fees, childcare, second referendums, defining a woman, although, in fairness, that was only 99% of a U-turn. The list goes on, but the theme is the same. It is empty words, broken promises, and absolutely no plan." A visibly shocked Sir Keir hit out at Mr Sunak. "Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber. Shame. Parading as a man of integrity when he's got absolutely no responsibility." He added, "I think the role of the Prime Minister is to ensure that every single citizen in this country feels safe and respected. It's a shame that the Prime Minister doesn't share that." Later on, Labour MP Liz Twist asked Mr Sunak to apologise for his insensitive comment. The Prime Minister ignored the question, but then, at the end of the session, paid tribute to Miss J. "Could I just say also to Brianna J's mum, who is here, as I've said earlier this week, what happened was an unspeakable and shocking tragedy, and, as I said earlier this week, in the face of that, for her mother to demonstrate the compassion and empathy that she did last weekend, I thought demonstrated the very best of humanity in the face of seeing the very worst of humanity, and she deserves all our admiration and praise for that." Ms Sturgeon took to X, the site formerly Twitter, saying the comment from Mr Sunak was truly terrible. She added, "But let's not kid ourselves. Had Brianna's mum not been there today, no one, including Keir Starmer, would have batted an eyelid. It's not good enough to stand against transphobia only when the mother of a murdered trans girl might be listening. It needs to be done all of the time." That article was written by Andrew Learmonth. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 8th of February 2024 from the news section. Ministers stand firm in blocking release of ferry fiasco costs. This article is written by Martin Williams. MSPs are expected to discuss what further action to take after ministers continue to block disclosure of the full cost of the ferry fiasco. The Scottish Parliament's Public Audit Committee has been continuing to try to break down the confidentiality veil around the affair after the Herald revealed that the Scottish Government entered into 10 gagging clauses with external private companies concerning the state-owned and publicly funded shipyard firm Ferguson Marine at the centre of the fiasco. It comes as some have raised concerns that oversight of the scandal is not robust enough to prevent further delays and increased costs. The Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray is being quizzed about how to prevent further problems, delays and extra costs in relation to the 2 long-delayed and significantly over-budget vessels being built by the nationalised Ferguson Marine shipyard firm in Inverclyde. The detailed interrogation is being conducted as it emerged that public spending watchdogs Audit Scotland, in an analysis in March 2022, stated the Scottish Government is committed to paying the additional vessel costs regardless of the final price. The Herald revealed that the First Minister was given secret advice that the public cost of a ferry fiasco at Ferguson's is expected to soar even further than anticipated, when ministers decided to continue to go ahead with much of the project, despite it not being value for money. Despite the warning given by the secret report by consultants Teneo, ministers decided that the job must be completed at the state-owned shipyard. And last week it emerged that further ship design issues with the so-called green fuel, LNG, was adding even more delay and costs to the project. A Scottish Government due diligence review, supported by a secret analysis by consultants Teneo, said it would be cheaper to scrap the ship still being built at Ferguson Marine and place a new order elsewhere. It had been thought the Teneo report was subject of a non-disclosure agreement, but ministers have now cast serious doubt over that. But the Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray gave a rare shareholder authorisation, known as a written authority, in May to plough ahead with supporting the delivery of the 2 ferries at Ferguson Marine in May, saying it is the platform upon which the future success can be built. He said that non-delivery of the ferries at nationalised Ferguson Marine, Port Glasgow, would put the very future of the yard and the jobs it supports in jeopardy. A similar shareholder authorisation, in the form of a letter of comfort, was made as the Scottish Government forced the awarding of the disastrous ferry contract to the then Jim McColl-led Ferguson Marine in October 2015, despite concerns from state-owned ferry owners and buyers, Caledonian Maritime Assets Limited, that there was no mandatory builder's refund guarantee. The Scottish Government has blocked information over the costs that led to Mr Gray's written authority, citing it was exempt in terms of the Freedom of Information Act because its release would result in substantial prejudice to its commercial interests. But in response to a Herald challenge to the Scottish Government's stance over the blocking of information relating to the costs around the value for money assessment, ministers are now no longer relying on its previous stance that any publication would cause substantial prejudice to Ferguson Marine. Instead, they are using another loophole that claims exemption because its disclosure would cause substantial prejudice to the effective conduct of public affairs. It came after Public Audit Committee convener Richard Leonard told Mr Gray there is no such caveat regarding commercial confidentiality in the Scottish Public Finance Manual for publication of a written authority. He told Mr Gray it therefore seeks to establish why the Scottish Government considers there to be issues of commercial confidentiality when it comes to publishing occurrences of shareholder authorisation for companies wholly owned by Scottish ministers. But Mr Gray maintained the information block, saying, "The point previously made around commercial confidentiality was simply to highlight that there may be various circumstances under which a shareholder authorisation is requested or provided, and we cannot guarantee that there would not be commercial confidentiality issues. Similar to any incidence of written authority, the disclosing of any details around shareholder authorisations would require Scottish Government to observe legal and contractual obligations in respect of the detail to be disclosed." Mr Gray also said an NDA was signed in preparation for confidential information being shared ahead of a contract award relating to the due diligence report on the costs for both ferries. The other parties to that contract were the now nationalised Ferguson Marine, Port Glasgow, Limited, FMPG, and Scottish Government advisers Teneo and Woodbank Marine. He said that NDA did not extend to the completed due diligence report. As it transpired, the NDA was only finalised by all parties on the day the contract was signed, on September the 29th, 2022, meaning it was immediately superseded. With regards to the other NDAs referenced, These remain active and relate to ongoing commercially sensitive work. I am therefore unable to provide the details. The Scottish Parliament's Public Audit Committee is expected to further examine the ministerial response. Edward Mountain, the convener of Net Zero, Energy and Transport Committee, has been demanding answers over the level of oversight of the disastrous project as the costs continue to soar. He previously wrote to Mr Gray to ask him to detail how oversight of Ferguson Marine by government and its agencies is being practically carried out to protect the taxpayers' ongoing investment. He has also asked whether improvements to governance and project management that public spending watchdogs Audit Scotland and other parliamentary committees have said are necessary to reduce further delays and costs to the taxpayer have actually been made. That article was written by Martin Williams. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 8th of February 2024 from the news section. Pavement parking ban is about to be introduced in Glasgow. This exclusive article is written by Katrina Stewart. A Scottish city has confirmed it will shortly use new legislation to introduce fines to prevent drivers parking cars on pavements and double parking. Glasgow City Council said the introduction of penalty charge notices is imminent, and drivers around the city will begin to see warning notices on their cars. The council could not give a specific date for the launch of the fines, but said new computer software would be needed first. Councillor Angus Miller, City Convener for Transport, said, "Pavement parking and other types of problematic parking deters people from walking in their communities and can create safety issues for wheelchair users and people pushing prams. The new powers that allow enforcement against pavement parking, double parking and parking next to dropped curbs will help us tackle the many complaints we receive from concerned residents across the city. To raise awareness of the new powers, we have been issuing warning notices to drivers in various parts of the city where problem parking has been identified. We hope this approach will encourage drivers to make changes to how they park their vehicles before they risk being issued with a £100 penalty charge notice." Last month, Edinburgh City Council became the first city in Scotland to enforce a ban on pavement parking using new legislation passed in 2021, but that was activated on January the 29th. It said a survey of residents showed 68% of respondents indicated their support for the plans. Other local authorities around the country are following suit, but implementation is in the gift of each council area, so introduction of the legislation is varied. Officials in Glasgow said the city is being surveyed to see if some streets might be spared from the ban. Mr Miller added, "Our back office systems are being updated in line with the new legislation and aim to begin full enforcement of the new powers in the near future. We're also undertaking a full assessment of the roads network to help us establish if it would be appropriate to exempt any streets from a pavement parking ban." Highland Council was next to follow Edinburgh, with several other local authorities, including Aberdeen City Council, currently considering whether to introduce similar laws. London has had a ban in place since 1974. However, there have been concerns raised that banning pavement parking will make certain streets too narrow for the passage of bin lorries or the safe access of emergency services. That article was written by Katrina Stewart. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 8th of February 2024 from the news section. Rosa Sally. UK government's asylum policies fueling far right. This article is written by Jodie Harrison. The UK government's approach to asylum seekers has failed and created inhumane living conditions for those fleeing to the UK, a former refugee turned politician has said. Glasgow Councillor Rosa Sally, Scotland's first asylum seeker elected to public office, said the practice of housing people fleeing to the UK in temporary accommodation, such as hotels and barges, had fuelled the far right. And she believes the only beneficiaries of the current system are private organisations, whose executives receive enormous salaries for providing substandard accommodation, thanks to contracts handed out by the Tories, costing the taxpayers millions of pounds. Writing in the Herald, Miss Sally said that the UK government has exacerbated the housing crisis by presiding over a huge backlog in cases, which had left local authorities ill-equipped to respond. She called for the reform of the system, saying that the UK government needed to commit to housing asylum seekers in communities and ending the practice of using temporary accommodation. Marking the first anniversary of far-right protests against refugees being housed in an Erskine hotel, Miss Sally said, "The government's pursuit of large-scale asylum accommodation centres and the use of barges and ex-military bases perpetuate inhumane living conditions. Institutional accommodation strips individuals of their personal identity and ability to look after themselves, leading to adverse mental and physical health outcomes for already vulnerable people. The government's dependence on private companies for asylum accommodation is flawed, lacking public accountability to local authorities, who should receive public funds instead. The private organisations used by the Home Office make huge profits from these contracts, while their chief executives are paid enormous salaries. It's a disgrace that these private companies are allowed to get away without any accountability to the public." She added, "The UK government needs to think again. Its approach has failed and reform is required. We need a fair vision fostering an efficient asylum system that allows people who seek sanctuary to rebuild their lives safely as part of our communities." That article was written by Jodie Harrison.
From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 8th of February, in the sports section, Aberdeen's Miovski addresses Celtic and Rangers transfer links. Article by Mark Walker. Bojan Miovski admits he's come a long way from his first club, where his bedroom was infested by mice, to become one of Europe's most wanted strikers. But he insists he is delighted to be at Aberdeen, and the transfer speculation just proved he's doing his job right. The North Macedonian international netted his 20th goal of the season after scoring against Rangers this week, just days after netting against Celtic too. He looks certain to be the subject of strong transfer interest in the summer, with Aberdeen set to rake in a record fee that will surely smash the current record of the £4.2 million received from Liverpool for Calvin Ramsey. However, Miovski insists he's in no rush to go anywhere in an interview in a Serbian magazine. He said, "I'm playing the best season of my career at Aberdeen and I'm enjoying football. I like Scotland. It has a great passion for football. People love the club. They are with us everywhere. I like Scottish football because it is played very quickly and all the time the balls are put forward towards strikers. The game is played with a lot of contact, but it's direct and I love seeing this much action in the penalty box. I am happy to be linked with clubs like Celtic, Rangers and Southampton because that means I'm making progress. I still have 2 years on my contract in Aberdeen. I am focused on the club and winning a place in Europe like last year. What will the future bring? I don't know. Now, I'm only focused on my club, and that is my goal, to be as good as possible." Aberdeen are in the top 3 clubs in Scotland. Celtic and Rangers are one thing, Aberdeen is another. Our club signs young players for less money and gives everyone a chance. It is a historic club. Just look at the fact that the most trophy-winning club in Europe, Real Madrid, last lost a European final to Aberdeen. and the 24-year-old outlined his humble footballing beginnings that eventually led him to Pittodrie. He said, "I am the only one in my family who plays football. I came through the Macedonian FA Academy, and my first match was as a left-back. I signed for Robotniki before I get an offer from Macedonian coach to sign for Karabag in Azerbaijan on loan. It sounded good because I was able to play against Chelsea, Roma and Atletico Madrid in the Champions Youth League. But when I arrived, I was very disappointed with the conditions. Our base was like a boarding school. It was very bad. In the room I slept in, there were mice under the bed. Those moments were the hardest in my life. I couldn't sleep. I was counting down the days until I got home, and it only lasted 4 months. I was told I was not wanted in the first team at Robotniki, so I went to Belgrade to sign for Zemun. But there I received another shock. The club did not pay some former players and were banned from signing new players. 10 of us were told we had to go, and I didn't receive any money at all. I had to go back home and sign for Dorche Petrov and then to Renova, where I reached my worst moment. I came on as a sub in the 73rd minute and was substituted off before the end of the game. Finally, a new manager, Buyar Islami, arrived and I started to play and score goals. It is difficult to get a transfer from the Macedonian League abroad to a good club, but MTK Budapest was the right move for me, made at the right time. The Hungarian League was a great opportunity to prove myself. They give young players a chance there, and that was good to see. I played in the MTK jersey for 2 years. We had good and bad moments. The last 6 months there weren't so good, but as a reward for everything, I got an offer from Ferivar in Hungary and Aberdeen. The decision to go to Scotland was the best in my career. And that article was written by Mark Walker. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 8th of February, Sport. Football. Diggs come back to bite Adams as Ross County calamity ends. Article by Graham McGarry. You have to hand it to Derek Adams. No, not his P45 as Roy McGregor just has. Perhaps not since Dracula himself have we witnessed somebody with less capacity for reflection, and the stake has now been driven through the heart of his third, and inarguably disastrous, spell as Ross County manager. Scottish football's answer to Liz Truss has gone, his 79 days in charge at County perhaps just eclipsing the lifespan of a lettuce, in fairness, but proving to be just as calamitous as the reign of the former PM. After Adams' infamous panning of Scottish football and the standard of his team, his men didn't win a match, and lost 5 of the 7 they played. It is hard, it seems, to perform at your peak as a professional footballer after you've been tossed mercilessly under a bus. Adams found out the hard way that in this day and age, the only reaction a manager is likely to provoke from castigating his own players in public is a downing of the tools. And when his team went down in pitiable fashion at Fir Park on Tuesday evening, he again avoided any notion that some of the blame may, perish the thought, lie with him. Humility, though, didn't seem to be his strong point. His post-match interviews became the stuff of legend, and Tuesday nights was no exception. From the Morecambe are 100 times better than County shot to the refusing to say if he regrets coming back to Dingwall chaser, he couldn't have given off the air of a man in a dire hostage situation more when he was in front of the camera, supposing he wore an orange boiler suit and held up a copy of that day's newspaper. Everyone knew the situation he had walked into, he said, as he attempted to place the proverbial 12-foot barge pole between himself and any responsibility for County's dire predicament. Well, let's examine that situation, shall we? When Malky Mackay was somewhat surprisingly sacked in mid-November, County were nevertheless 11th in the table and on a dire run of 9 games without a victory. They were only above Livingston in goal difference, so Adams can rightly point to the 6-point gap that now exists between the sides as an improvement in their circumstances. The flip side of that coin, though, is that County won just 2 of his 12 games in charge and are currently, once again, on a run of 9 matches without a win, culminating in their humiliation at Fir Park. They were embarrassed by Partick Thistle in the Scottish Cup, at home, as the Jags took lusty revenge for the playoff heartache imposed upon them last season, while the teams above County are starting to disappear over the horizon. The win for Motherwell puts them 6 points clear of County, while St Johnstone are the closest side to the playoff spot, but still hold a 5-point advantage over the Staggies. His hastily assembled hodgepodge of players, many of them drawn from the English lower leagues, being torn asunder in Lanarkshire was the perfect response to his criticism of the standard in the Premiership, and you had the feeling as he stood forlornly in his technical area on Tuesday, it may finally have dawned on him that he had grossly underestimated the level. A penny for his thoughts as Blair Spittle curled a stupendous 25-yarder into the county postage stamp for Motherwell's fourth. Morecambe must have some squad if their players 100 times better than him. Who knows? If he keeps up this sort of form, then the big dream move to League 2 in the summer might well be on. Think, if he sticks in, he may well be able to handle the step up. I'm being hugely facetious, of course, but only to illustrate a point about how ludicrous Adam's comments about the standard of the Scottish game were, and he never really recovered from them. There was a grain of truth in there about the lack of quality on display in some matches, yes, as is the case in every league. But one can only imagine he had cause to revise his opinion as he watched his team being pulled apart by the outfit sitting, at that point, 10th place in the table. Fair play to the 57 county fans who made the long trip down from Dingwall on a freezing Tuesday night and paid a fortune to sit in a bucket seat through 90 minutes of absolute dross from their team. Fans of provincial clubs don't ask for much for their heroes, and they expect little in the way of success. What are non-negotiables though are the exhibition of fight, heart and a willingness from the players to run themselves into the ground. The hugely concerning thing for them during the week was not that their team were outplayed, but that they didn't put up so much as a token resistance in what was their biggest match of the season so far. Players didn't go with runners. They didn't bother to get close to the man on the ball. The men in claret and amber had run it off the place, and the fact that it ended just a 5-0 defeat actually painted this county display in a more favourable light than it deserved. It was abysmal stuff, and the sort of performance that screamed out that the players were simply not playing for their manager. I don't know Adams personally, and it would be harsh to judge him in his often jaw-dropping post-match ponderings alone. Away from the cameras, he might well be the most affable man you could ever meet. But what we can judge is the most important thing, what his team produces for him on the field. And the evidence was damning. They have Rangers away next week, and then a trip to Dundee before a home game against bottom side Livingston. County Chairman McGregor cannot be blamed for cutting his losses at this point and drawing a line under what proved to be an unmitigated disaster. I will say this for Adams, at least he resigned. That was the first semblance of an admission of sorts that he was in some way responsible for this entire mess. That article was by Graham McGarry.
This is from the Herald Scotland on Friday the 9th of February 2024. From the news section. Wicks. Scots financial watchdog chief spent £400 on dinner for two. Exclusive by Martin Williams. The chief executive of the under fire Scots water industry financial watchdog indulged in a £400 meal for two with a foreign water industry official at a former Michelin star restaurant. The £200 a head executive bill has emerged as the latest in a run of spending described as unacceptable by auditors and poor governance with public funds, it can be revealed. The Herald previously revealed that the Water Industry Commission for Scotland, Wicks, sent a senior executive on two £5,000 return flights to the US as part of the scandal. It was confirmed just before Christmas that Chief Executive Alan Sutherland had left his role with immediate effect after Audit Scotland found unacceptable use of public funds by senior officials at the water industry watchdog. The Wicks is coming under scrutiny over its expenditure, including spending £77,000 on sending Chief Operating Officer Michelle Ashford on a training course at the Harvard Business School in the US, and a series of perks given to staff, including leaving lunches and birthday and Christmas gifts. Some £2,600 was claimed to provide every staff member with a £100 gift card for Christmas. It has emerged that the latest concerns over the body's spending surrounds Mr Sutherland entertaining a representative of the New Zealand water industry at the award-winning Champney Inn in Linlithgow in October 2022. Auditors say there was no submitted receipt for the spending, so there was no way of knowing what the split was between food and drink. The fine dining restaurant, which opened in 1983, was awarded 1 star in the Michelin Guide in 2008, but lost it in the 2012 guide. It has further emerged that the chief executive had 47 expense claims totalling nearly £4,500 from April 2022 to October 2023 that were not supported by itemised receipts. And according to Audit Scotland, 1 in 8 expenses claims submitted by the senior management team did not have itemised receipts, totalling £9,660, and it largely surrounded the entertaining of foreign visitors. Audit Scotland has said there was very significant concern over the lack of receipts, saying that they do not see this type of activity in our audits. The majority of the expenditure related to what was termed business entertaining costs and was connected to food and drinks with international delegations. They say that there were multiple foreign trips, particularly to New Zealand, as part of the Hydro Nation strategy and the provision of services to the water industry there, as it was going through its evolution. That work started with a project for 2 of the country's water and sewerage companies, Wellington Water and Watercare, the largest water and sewerage provider in the country. Hydro Nation is a Scottish Government initiative aimed at building international partnerships, sharing knowledge and undertaking joint research. And Wix has previously said that they found that water sectors the world over were facing many of the challenges faced in Scotland, such as planning for climate change and ensuring that the industry's infrastructure will be fit for the future. It is understood that all members of the senior management team, 4 directors and the chief executive, had corporate credit cards. The executive flights bill to the US exceeded the £8,819 run-up in the unpaid UK tax and national insurance contributions dating back to 2018-19, over perks given to staff, including leaving lunches and birthday and Christmas gifts. They included some £5,500 spent on £100 Christmas gift vouchers for each member of staff over 2 years, 2021-22 and 2022-23, without any tax being paid. Auditors have said this exceeded the regulator's delegated limit of £75 for gifts and should have been approved by the Scottish Government, but was not. The Scots water industry financial watchdog is expected to use public funds to settle the personal tax issues as a result of the spending. The Wix has already told Audit Scotland there was an oversight over spending that needed Scottish Government approval, which it said it accepted and regretted. Wix management advised that it recognised that some of the processes that worked well when they were based in Moray House lapsed when the Commission started to work remotely, and accepted there was insufficient discussion on expenditure. Wix has said it was committed to address issues raised by the public spending auditors. Auditor-General Stephen Boyle has, meanwhile, told MSPs on the Scottish Parliament's Public Audit Committee that there were cultural issues at the Wix that needed addressed. The Chief Executive was to oversee changes with a view to implementation next month. At the time of the auditor's investigation, it was still Mr Sutherland who was to take this on, and Mr Boyle issued a caution that there is still a gap in the leadership of the Commission at present since the resignation of the Chief Executive. There are cultural issues within the Commission, and there needs to be more rigour as part of their internal control arrangements, that they have appropriate controls, checks and balances, he said. There were a range of deficiencies in internal control whereby there wasn't that rigour of culture on expenses. If you're claiming back, you have to have a receipt. So these were being processed without those in place. In terms of giving hospitality, the Scottish Public Finance Manual also covers this in a fair degree of detail. The expectation and assumption is this will be a very rare and unusual set of activity for a public body to be offering hospitality. There are clear boundaries and concerns also about receiving hospitality as a public official, for the concern that might influence judgment. The regulator is funded through a levy on Scottish Water and on retailers that participate in the competitive non-household water market. The size of these levies is set by Scottish ministers. Scottish Water operates under an annual borrowing limit set by the Scottish Government. The annual borrowing limit controls the amount by which Scottish Water can increase externally sourced finance. As at March the 31st, 2023, government loans totalled £4.5 billion. Net new borrowing by Scottish Water from the Scottish Government was planned to be to the tune of £196 million in 2023-24 to carry out its activities. The Commission, which employs 26 staff, received income of £5.288 million during the year, including levy income of £2.279 million from Scottish Water, £1.718 million from licensed providers, and £1.185 million from international work related to the Scottish Government's Hydro Nation strategy. The Wix is responsible for determining the level of revenue Scottish Water needs to collect through customer charges in order to deliver the objectives set for it by Scottish ministers. It has a duty to determine the lowest reasonable overall cost that Scottish Water will have to incur to meet ministers' environmental, quality and service objectives for the industry. The post of Water Industry Commissioner for Scotland was created in 1999 and Mr Sutherland was appointed to the role. His remit was to advise the then Scottish Executive on the charges that the water authorities could and should set for their customers. After the Water Industry Scotland Act 2002, the Commissioner continued in this advisory role, though this time it was the newly formed Scottish Water that he would advise. A Wix spokesman said that it accepted the findings of the Auditor-General's analysis and recognised there have been significant governance deficiencies in the past. The spokesman went on, "We're committed to addressing these issues and have begun to implement a 13-point action plan that will bring in greater oversight, tighter financial controls and rigorous staff training." That article was by Martin Williams.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 12th of February, news. Ex-drug addict found God and became a catering entrepreneur. By Karen Peaty. A former drug addict who is now a successful catering entrepreneur and had to ask his mother-in-law how to make steak pie has told how he got his first big break in business after being asked to run a church cafe. Speaking in yesterday's Go Radio business show with Hunter and Haughey, Ryan Longmuir discussed the highs and lows of his life, from a misspent youth taking drugs, leading to his arrest in New Zealand for importing drugs, to establishing Regis Banqueting. Mr. Longmuir, despite his many problems in his younger days, said he always had that wee entrepreneurial spark, recalling how he had a paper round and even made a bootleg VHS copy of The Lion King to sell. Getting caught importing drugs into New Zealand was the catalyst for change, and when I turned my life around. He also found God, stating, "I decided I wanted to make my life count and make a success of it." Today, Regis Banqueting operates out of 6,000 square feet central production unit in Cumbernauld and employs about 200 people, 70 full-time equivalent. The business caters for everything from small business lunches to larger corporate events and has contracts with the University of Glasgow and Dundee United FC. We are event-based catering company and do about 450 weddings a year, said Mr. Longmuir. We catered at some Commonwealth Games venues in Glasgow in 2012 and at last year's UCI Cycling World Championships. Our USP, unique selling point, is that we're not the most expensive or cheapest, but that all our staff are and in-house, so there is a good culture here. Recalling how he was able to expand Regis Banqueting after securing a £5,000 loan from what was then known as the Scottish Youth Business Trust, PSYBT. Mr Longmuir said he had the opportunity to speak to then Prince Charles at COP28 when his firm was catering for an event attended by Charles, Camilla, William and Kate. COVID presented challenges and saw the company lose 85% of its business, but Regis Banqueting pivoted, donated thousands of meals to homeless and vulnerable people during lockdown, and seized opportunities created by the crisis. And the article was by Karen Peaty. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 12th of February, from the news section, RFA Stirling Castle arrives at new home in Faslane Naval Base. Report by Jodie Harrison. The commanding officer of the Navy's new mine-hunting mothership has spoken of his pride at the wonderful vessel after it recently arrived at its home in the Clyde. RFA Stirling Castle is part of the Navy's paradigm shift on how it deals with the threat of sea mines around the world and could be ready for operations later this year. A former oil-rig support ship, it was purchased by the Ministry of Defence in 2023 and will be used to transport and launch autonomous uncrewed boats which will scan the seas for mines. Its crews are currently going through an intense period of trials to prepare for the 6,000-ton ship for initial operational capability, which they hope to reach later this year. A dedicated ceremony could take place as early as April. RFA Stirling Castle and other ships like it will replace the Navy's ageing fleet of Sandown-class mine-hunting ships, most of which have left the service. Last week, the Navy's Mine and Threat Exploitation Group, MTXG, showed some of their underwater drones to the PA News Agency during a tour of the ship. Stirling Castle's commanding officer is Richard Greville, who has recently rejoined the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, RFA, after a career which included captaining super yachts. He described the challenges of bringing a new class of ship into the RFA which supports the Royal Navy. He told PA, "There's been equipment fits on board that's been done in order for the vessel to move into its military service. So it's been a long process. It's been challenging, but it's been rewarding. It's been very different for us. The threat from mines is ever evolving and ever potent," he said, adding, "What we have the ability to do is deal with the safety by using autonomous and remote vehicles at a standoff distance." He said he is confident RFA Stirling Castle and other ships of its class can take on the task performed by the fleet of Sandown and Hunt-class mine hunters. Mr Revel, who is from Milnathwaite and Perthington Ross, said, "I have a soft spot obviously because for myself I'm not very far from Stirling Castle. Being in the first Scottish named ship is an absolute pleasure. I'm very proud to be the commanding officer of such a wonderful platform with the capability that it has." RFA Stirling Castle arrived in Scotland at the end of January. After final training on the south coast of England, the mine-hunting ship will return to the Clyde, where it will spend most of this year. Its main job will be to carry mine-hunting boats which have been used to clear the submarine lanes around the Faslane Naval Base. As well as operating these boats, the MTXG uses underwater drones to pinpoint sea mines and historic ordnance. One of these is the commercially available Ivor 3, which can autonomously scan the seabed using sonar before reporting its findings back to the crew on the surface. Lieutenant Chris Stone of the MTXG Zulu Squadron told PA, "It's a paradigm shift for the Royal Navy from the legacy mine countermeasure vessels. The Scottish people will definitely have seen it about on the Clyde. We're bringing in a brand new remote and autonomous capability." He added, "You only have to threaten to lay a mine in an area and that raises insurance premiums for shipping. We need a credible capability to deal with that in future, and that's what we're working towards now." As a foreign war commercial ship, the comfort of the accommodation at RFA Stirling is higher than on Royal Navy warships. Previously a Norwegian vessel, it has onboard sauna and 2 gyms. The ship is relatively lightly crewed with 54 personnel, but only 27 will be deployed at any one time. Mr Revel said the crewing arrangements gave a good work and home life balance and would help with recruitment. And that article was by Jodie Harrison. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 12th of February, from the news section. University of Edinburgh student invents takeaway delivery robot. Article by Gabriel Mackay. A University of Edinburgh student has told how she's using personal tragedy to try and spark a revolution in autonomous vehicles. Artificial intelligence and robotics student Ebthahal Alotaibi lost her aunt in a car accident which was caused by a driver error and initially wanted to develop an autonomous taxi. After receiving advice though, she has instead created two custom-built robots, Pixie 1 and 2, which will deliver food from the King's Building Cafe to students across campus. The robots, developed by her company Pix Convey, are capable of navigating roads, traffic lights and pedestrian crossings, but current regulations don't allow for autonomous vehicles without adhering to strict protocols. The student hopes that by proving her concept on campus, she can enter Pixie 1 and 2 into road trials. Ms. Alotaibi said, "I lost my aunt in 2014 in a car accident that also claimed her husband's life. She was just 30 years old, and their 3 children are left without their parents. It was the fault of another driver, and I can't accept that someone could pass away because of someone else's behaviour when driving. I did some research and found that 94% of car accidents are caused by human error, so there is a lot of potential for driverless vehicles to be safer. Our robots constantly map their surroundings and can navigate around people, traffic, and dogs who really don't like them. But regulation is not yet set up for autonomous vehicles, which is why we are trialling it in a campus environment. She will collaborate with King's Building's catering service, which will integrate the widely used UPay takeaway app with Alotaibi's Pix Convey app. When ordering, if the student chooses delivery, they can specify the location and choose a time slot. Once the order is ready, the catering staff loads the food onto the robot's cargo. Using the Pix Convey dashboard, the staff dispatches the robot, which autonomously navigates to the delivery location. Upon arrival, indicated by a dashboard notification, the catering personnel remotely opens the robot's cargo door. The customer retrieves their order and closes the door, and the robot takes itself back to the catering area. Getting takeaway food delivered is increasingly expensive, partly due to labour costs and shortages. Where cars are used, it also increases greenhouse gas emissions and, during the pandemic, there were hygiene concerns too. We think Pix Convey can address all these issues. Electric vehicles have zero emissions, our business model is an affordable monthly subscription for the restaurant, and the robot sanitises the food cartons using LED rays. We hope that it will also create high quality jobs, for instance the technicians who operate and maintain the robots, or the insurers who will have to address this new field of activity. Dr. John Lonsdale, Head of Enterprise at Edinburgh Innovation, said, "It's great to see another of our student entrepreneurs showing their ingenuity and initiative to develop new technologies. We are delighted to be able to support Ebtahal in her innovation journey." Alotabi's PhD supervisor at the University of Edinburgh School of Informatics, Dr. Michael Herman, said, "This project also provides a testbed for students and researchers to explore machine learning and multi-agent systems. This important research area includes the direct cooperation of humans and robots, which will be an important feature of our future working environment." And that article was by Gabriel Mackay.
This is from the Herald Scotland on Monday, the 12th of February 2024. From Voices section. Action needed to avert outbreak of the most infectious virus we know. Article by Dr. Claire Crossan. With a second measles case in Scotland confirmed since October 2023, people are being urged to seek vaccination to prevent an outbreak. Measles is the most contagious virus known to man. It is estimated that in the absence of control measures such as vaccinations, any one person infected with measles would transmit the virus to between 12 and 18 people. Because of this, it is essential to have a high vaccination coverage in the population. Currently, children are offered a first dose at 12 months and a second dose at 40 months. The World Health Organization, WHO, recommends a minimum of 95% of people be vaccinated with 2 doses of the vaccine to reduce the possibility of an outbreak. 10 years ago in Scotland, the vaccination coverage of 6-year-olds having received 2 doses stood at 94.3%. In recent years, however, there has been a worrying downward trend, with only 91% of 6-year-olds receiving 2 doses as of September last year. It is frequently said that vaccines are victims of their own success. Their ability to almost eradicate a disease means people no longer witness the misery that the disease once brought. Complacency creeps in, vaccine uptake goes down, opening the door for the disease to return. WHO has named vaccine hesitancy as one of the top 10 threats to global health. The MMR vaccine, which protects against measles, mumps and rubella, has suffered a double blow. Not only has its effectiveness led to complacency, fear surrounding the vaccine was generated by the flawed and now overwhelmingly disproven Wakefield Report of 1998, which incorrectly proposed a link between the vaccine and autism. The incidence of autism in children who have and have not received the vaccine is no different. The call to vaccination not only applies to children. The long-standing hesitancy regarding the MMR vaccine means many adults are unvaccinated. If you are an unvaccinated adult, there are many reasons for considering accepting the vaccine. Adults are not exempt from the complications associated with measles infection, and getting vaccinated protects you from the disease. Children under 1 and those with underlying health conditions cannot have the vaccine, but are more likely to become seriously ill if infected. Being vaccinated not only reduces the risk that you could infect a vulnerable child, it decreases the likelihood of an outbreak, and so you help to protect the most vulnerable children throughout your community. Measles infection during pregnancy carries a risk to the unborn child, but it is not recommended for pregnant women to receive the vaccine. So, if you are considering having a child, it is best to seek vaccination at least 1 month before trying to conceive. If you are unsure if you received your vaccinations as a child, you can ask your GP to check your records. If you are feeling hesitant about vaccinating your child, speak to a healthcare professional. Like other respiratory viruses, measles transmission benefits from the cold weather in winter and early spring. If you are unvaccinated, now is a great time to act. Get vaccinated and help reduce the risk of measles outbreak in Scotland. Dr. Claire Crossan is a virologist with Glasgow Caledonian University. This is from the Herald Scotland on Monday, the 12th of February 2024. From Voices section. Mark Smith. What about the people still on the edge, Mr. Yusuf? Either you're affected by it now, or you will be. In the last few days alone, Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire, Kinussie in the Highlands, Skye, Drumnadrochit on Loch Ness, and the rail line between Inverness and Perth. You may think you've avoided it this time around. Most of us have. But there will come a day when it will be hard to escape. That's the way we're going. So what are the authorities doing about it? The flooding, the devastation, the danger. One of the communities that's been worst affected is Brecon in Angus. When the town was hit by Storm Babette last October, the First Minister Humza Yousaf paid a visit and said he would act. "I've seen the devastation," he said. "We're here to help as much as we can," he said, "and we're here for the long haul." Oh, but Mr. Yousaf, what has become of that? More than 120 homes were evacuated when Brecon was flooded and hit with even more heavy rain a few weeks later. 3 months on from the storm, they are still washing the streets to try to get rid of the sewage and the oil and the slime. There are 60 properties that may never be habitable again, and the people who've been affected have received nowhere near the level of help they need. In some cases, they've received nothing at all. Let us go into the details. Firstly, because it highlights what the people of Brecon still need, but secondly, because it underlines the huge holes in government policy, holes that will be regularly filled with filthy floodwater if we don't do things differently. We're now at the point where almost all of us, except extreme weather caused by climate change, is becoming more common, and yet government policy is falling behind. But first, more about what help the residents of Brecon have and haven't received. The Scottish Government has given the residents £1,500 each and businesses £3,000, which may seem decent in some ways, but as one local told me at the weekend, it's not much when you've lost everything. The area of the town worst affected, River Street, is also a place where a lot of people don't have a lot of money. And how far does £1,500 get you anyway? We should also talk about the farmers in the area. Storm Babette was disastrous for them. We're talking average losses of hundreds of thousands of pounds. But when the farmers asked if they could get the £3,000 payout, they were told no. To make matters worse, £61 million of agricultural funding, which the UK Treasury allocated to the Scottish Government, has been withdrawn by Mr Youssef and his ministers and spent on God knows what. The money that's supposed to replace the old EU grants has also been cut back too. It's grim. And the bigger reality is that, even though the people of Brecon and the surrounding area are going to be struggling with this for years to come, some people have houses they can never sell. This isn't just a problem for one town in Angus. I remember standing in pools of dirty water in Dumfries, speaking to some of the people flooded out by the Nith yet again. But look at the cases I mentioned at the start of this piece. It's national. It's everywhere. So why then is Scotland's response to the problem so disconnected and small? Obviously, local people want to do their bit, and the residents of Brecon have been brilliant in helping each other out. To pay for the recovery, Angus Council has also had to take more than £250,000 from its reserves and counting. And there are some good ideas locally, such as encouraging people to plant trees to help control the water, although that's a project that won't really start working for another 20 to 30 years. The answer is for national government to focus its priorities, do more to better coordinate all the agencies that work in flood defences, and above all, allocate more funds to helping out. Labour's plan, if, when they get into power, is to establish a resilience task force that would meet every winter and work on protecting communities from the dangers of flooding. The task force would also aim to better coordinate the work of central government, councils, local communities and the emergency services. It makes a lot of sense. The Scottish Government could also act right now to improve what it does. For a start, it should acknowledge that £1,500 for someone who may have lost their home and all their belongings is pathetic, and it really doesn't matter that it's worse in England, where they're only getting £500. We need to assess people's actual need and proceed from there, and a large central flood resilience fund would help. It's also obvious that, with extreme weather becoming more common and water lapping at our feet and gushing into our homes, every government should include a minister tasked with flooding and its consequences. A minister for emergencies, if you like. 1 in 6 houses are at risk of flooding, and the numbers are predicted to double by 2050. So why isn't there someone in government whose only job it is to better prepare? Perhaps then, government could start to grapple with the tricky question of which parts of Scotland are going to become uninhabitable, and how we help the people who live there right now. In the meantime, local communities across the country are left to struggle on, and the work continues in Brecon to recover as best they can. I spoke to one of the town's local councillors, Gavin Nicholl, over the weekend, and he laid it out in all its grimness. The flooded, filthy streets. How long will it take to recover? The empty houses. Would you be willing to live in one of them? And the £1,500. Would that pay for everything you owned? Obviously, the town has received some help, and that's a small step forward. The residents have also been consistently amazing. But the fact that the help Brecon has received is still not enough should be a warning to the rest of us about what's happening now and what's still to come. Look at the headlines: Ayrshire, Aberdeenshire, the Highlands, the Lowlands, again and again, closer and closer. How much more before the Scottish Government raises its game? That article was by Mark Smith, feature writer.
The Herald on the 13th of February and the news section. Scottish businesses survey places nation highly in UK League by Ian McConnell. What is probably at least as pleasing as the Scottish private sector economy's return to growth last month, a development revealed in a key survey published yesterday, is how well the nation's expansion ranks in the UK League. And the employment picture north of the border remains strong. This survey from the Royal Bank of Scotland also shows. The Scottish private sector economy was the fourth strongest performer among the 12 UK nations and regions in terms of its pace of increase in activity in January. Only London, the West Midlands and South West England grew faster than Scotland last month, according to Royal Bank's latest Purchasing Managers Index report. Scotland's business activity index rose from 49.4 in December to 51.7 last month in a seasonally adjusted basis, jumping above the 50 mark, deemed to separate expansion from contraction to indicate the first growth in 6 months. While a significant relief, especially given the dismal UK backdrop, it is far from plain sailing for the Scottish economy. The rebound in private sector activity in Scotland last month was enabled by a strong growth in services. This was heartening to see. However, Scotland's manufacturing sector recorded another sharp contraction. The continuing growth in employment in Scotland's private sector economy in January, which extended the run of increases to a year, was not surprisingly given the activity pattern driven by services. Employment in the manufacturing sector north of the border fell for the first time in 4 months. Judith Cruikshank, who chairs Royal Bank Scotland's board, noticed the imbalanced nature of the nation's growth. She said the Scottish private sector recorded an uplift in activity at the start of the year. The upturn was the first seen in 6 months and solid overall. However, growth was imbalanced, centred solely at service providers who have shown resilience amid subdued economic climate. Meanwhile, the manufacturing sector reported a further sharp deterioration. The survey did show that Scottish companies remain upbeat about their prospects, even if they are slightly less optimistic about the outlook for increased business activity on a 12-month horizon than they were in December. Ms. Cruikshank noted that elevated inflation and interest rates, as well as lingering economic uncertainty, could undermine growth prospects. There are undoubtedly challenges ahead. However, the latest PMI report on Scotland's private sector provides more cheer than gloom, especially given the difficult UK economic conditions. And that was by Ian McConnell. The Herald on the 13th of February and the news section. Trojan Energy Management boost following £26 million funding round by Kirsty Dorsey. Electric vehicle charging specialist Trojan Energy has appointed 3 new directors to help power its growth ambitions after securing a fresh £26 million funding injection last month. Chris Waples joins as non-executive chairman with 35 years of global experience in the infrastructure sector, with high-profile businesses, including John Laing, where he was executive director of asset management. Mr. Waples is currently a non-executive director at several organisations, including BBGI Global Infrastructure Fund, European solar and battery storage developer Zero Generation, waste-to-energy business South Clyde Energy Recovery, and MGT Teesside, a large-scale renewable power plant. Newly appointed non-executive director Terry Hart was part of the founding team of City Fibre, where he was chief financial officer for more than 9 years. A senior advisor to Octopus Investments In relation to its portfolio of investments in the fibre optic infrastructure sector, Mr. Hart is also a board advisor to Venus, a Macquarie-backed rural fibre operator. Keith Barclay of investment group BGF also joins as a non-executive director. He has been influential in a number of investments in Scotland during the past 8 years, including backing for Trojan Energy. Trojan announced last month that it had closed the biggest funding round to date for its clutter-free electric vehicle charging system. A £26 million equity injection was provided by BGF and the Scottish National Investment Bank. The Scottish National Investment Bank put in £80 million of follow-on funding from its previous investments, and the remaining £8 billion came from BGF, which was established in 2011 as the Business Growth Fund with a remit to support small and medium-sized businesses throughout the UK. Speaking at that time, Ms. Barclay said, "It's great to be supporting Trojan Energy's growth journey as they continue to roll out chargers and make the electric vehicle transition accessible for the millions of households without a driveway. The business has developed a high-quality product, and the clutter-free element is a key differentiator. We look forward to working closely with Chief Executive Ian Mackenzie and the wider team to reach their ambitious goals, and are excited to add another innovative company to BGF's growing climate tech portfolio." Set up in 2016 by 4 former oil and gas executives, Trojan Energy has developed a flat and flush charging system that takes up minimal pedestrian pavement space when in use and none when it's not in use. Drivers carry a charging lance in their vehicles, which is plugged into the pavement socket to begin charging. Trojan chargers are made in Aberdeen, where it's currently employs 68 people, with 600 points currently in operation in Oxfordshire and the London boroughs of Camden, Brent and Barnet councils. More than 70 councils throughout the UK, including several in Scotland, are said to be considering adopting the Trojan technology. "I'm pleased to welcome Chris, Terry and Keith to the Trojan Energy Board," Ms. Mackenzie said of today's appointments. Together they bring a wealth of strategic and leadership experience to the company, and each has a strong track record in helping build high-growth and high-performing companies. I look forward to working with them in the years ahead. An estimated 9 million households across the UK do not have access to their own driveway in which to install an electric vehicle charger. This has been identified as a barrier to the uptake of EVs amid concerns about the availability of public charging points. And that was by Kirsty Dorsey. The Herald on the 13th of February and the news section. Woman dies in A96 crash near Culloden and 3 seriously injured, by Jodie Harrison. A 51-year-old woman has died and another 3 people were seriously injured following a 3-vehicle crash near Inverness. The collision happened on the A96 at Red Hill near Inverness at around 12:10 p.m. on Monday. Police received reports of the crash, which involved a Tesla car, a Citroen van and a lorry. Emergency services attended, and 2 men and 1 woman who were in the Tesla car were taken to Regmore Hospital, where the 51-year-old woman died. The 53-year-old man is in critical condition, while a 23-year-old man is receiving treatment. The 37-year-old man who was driving the Citroen van was airlifted to Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, where he is in a serious condition. The driver of the HGV, a 69-year-old man, was uninjured. The road was closed to allow crash scene investigators access to the site to conduct further inquiries. Sergeant Cal McCauley said, "Our thoughts are with the families of those impacted by this collision. A full investigation is underway to establish the circumstances of how this collision occurred. I'm appealing to anyone who was on the A96 who may have seen the vehicles or witnessed crash to contact us. Motorists with dash cam equipment are asked to check for their footage, as there may be images which could assist our ongoing inquiries. Anyone with information is asked to call Police Scotland via 101, quoting incident number 1230 of Monday, February 12, 2024. and that was by Jodie Harrison.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels, Tune Review, and to tell your friends about our service.